couple of years ago, me and my newlywed wife, Cadence, went backpacking around Europe for our honeymoon. We were a relatively young couple, being 24 at the time. Me and my wife have almost everything in common with one another. The biggest difference between us is my skepticism of the supernatural and her love for it. Now, I will admit that I love being scared, and would honestly have liked to experience a supernatural event. But my lack of evidence and prior experience in such events made me naturally skeptical. Now, every time we'd entered a new town, we would ask the locals about any supernatural hotspots that might be around. But nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. Some of the stories they told us were just plain ridiculous. For example, they told us when we hit Romania that there were purple-eyed creatures that dwelled in the mines and cave systems. Who in the hell would believe such rubbish? After hearing this story at a tavern, we ran into another young couple that told us that they knew of a place that would scar us for life. Well, this is where our story began. Their names were Ivan and Anna, and they were locals who were engaged to be married next month and shared my wife's love of the supernatural, and thank God spoke English. I asked, "So, have you two been here before?" Ivan turned to me and said happily, "No, we are too scared to go by ourselves, and we've been looking for others to accompany us there." My wife replied with, "Well, we've been looking for something like this." She turned to me with that puppy dog eyes look and said, "Can we go, Tim?" I pondered a moment and thought that no harm would come out of it and told her, "Yeah, sure, sounds exciting, but what is this place exactly?" He told us it was an old graveyard where a massacre had happened centuries before. So, off we hiked into the mountains outside of some town I couldn't pronounce. I was spaced out and noticed Ivan was talking to me, but all I heard was something about gravity mountains or something. "We're almost there. Only another hour," he told us. My wife said aloud, "Well, it gets dark in roughly 3 hours, so I think we should camp here and rest a bit, then head towards it around 11 and get there at roughly midnight. Thoughts?" We all nodded in mutual agreement. After we got camp set up, we sat around a fire and told horror stories to get pumped up for the graveyard. We tried to get some sleep, but ended up only getting about 2 hours. I had had a dream that something in the woods was chasing us. Only it wasn't a being per se, but a force. It was flying above the trees, picking us off one by one, taking Ivan first and followed swiftly by Anna. Me and Cadence had taken refuge in a cave where we climbed up on our hands backwards as we heard the force approaching it with demonic screeching. We backed up to a wall and I swiftly turned around to see the decaying face of some ancient entity smiling at us. It screamed, "Did you think you could escape? The ritual is yet to be completed." It opened its mouth only to let blood and a black tarish looking substance pour out and started maniacally laughing. It reached for me, and as its claws dug into my skin and started burning, I was suddenly awoken by Cadence saying, "It's time to go." I refused to tell anyone about the dream because I didn't want to ruin anyone's good time or make them back out. We hiked for roughly an hour and I started to observe these woods. They were so thick and all-encumbering. Frankly, it scared the living shit out of me. Ivan said, "We're almost there, guys." "What are we going to do when we get there? Sit and wait for something to happen?" I said curiously. "Yeah, I suppose. No one really goes out here. The locals are very superstitious around here," Anna said. We arrived and started exploring the grounds. There weren't any gravestones or anything, but you could definitely feel that something bad had happened here. It just felt weird, and I could tell that everyone agreed. Cadence was about to comment on the ambience of the place when we all realized that there were people with torches coming from the direction opposite us, and we rushed to the bushes to observe. I whispered to the group, "Shit, get to the bushes." We ran as fast and as silent as possible towards the tree line, and observed that there were a group of black-robed figures approaching the site. They all walked to a little granite marker that was on the edge of the graveyard that we hadn't seen beforehand. I whispered to Ivan, "What the hell are you doing?" He was too petrified to answer, so I just looked at the figures once more. The figure cloaked in red, most likely their leader, approached the marker and opened up the leather-bound book that looked very ominous and started to recite from it. "Here we have gathered on the site where great sorrow has befallen many people, and humbly offer ourselves to you, our Lord Creel. We shall complete the ritual and take the life of our victim as your host and vessel, so you may once live again." We all looked up in horror as he pulled out a dagger and stabbed the screaming man that they had presented in the stomach. Cadence was about to scream, but I wrapped my hand around her mouth before she got the chance. Me and Ivan reacted by rushing at the group and tried to wrestle the dagger out of his hands, only to fail and be restrained by the group. Ivan screamed. This was not part of the plan. I was obviously in shock at his betrayal and looked over at him and screamed furiously, "You motherfucker! You set us up!" The leader screamed, "That is enough!" He looked at us, especially Ivan, and said, "Well, now you must have to be part of the sacrifice. The ritual cannot be completed if any of the witnesses are alive." I started panicking and screamed, "Who are you? What are you doing?" He looked at me with a look of irritation and replied, "We are part of an ancient cult dedicated to the Old Ones, and we are resurrecting our god, Creel. But unfortunately for you, his ritual requires all those who are present to be sacrificed, even ourselves. But it is a small sacrifice we must pay to reassure his return." I couldn't help it, but I started laughing out of the absurdity of the situation. While laughing, I said, "How fucking crazy are you? Do you hear the shit coming out your mouth?" All of a sudden, the dead man started convulsing and twitching uncontrollably. He rose up from the ground with his body bending in impossible ways and his mouth sprouting the same substances as in my dream. He began screaming, and on top of that substance, he was also dripping blood. He started levitating in the air, and the wind picked up enormously, and he started laughing in a demonic tone that sounded as if there was more than one person in there. And all of a sudden, it stopped, and he fell to his feet and started morphing into his true form. His claws and fur started ripping out of the man's skin, and his teeth were being forced out of his gums by sharp, shark-like teeth. He turned to us, and the leader said, "Welcome, Lord Creel. We have released you from your bonds. You need only slaughter the remaining sacrifices, and you shall be free to roam our plane of existence for all of eternity." Creel turned to the leader and smiled slightly and said, "You have done me a service, mortal, but there shall be no reward after." Creel ripped the man's throat out and turned and started slaughtering his followers one by one. I took advantage of the distraction and darted to the bushes to get Cadence, but she had already ran off apparently. I turned back to see Ivan running in the opposite direction, so I took a cue and started running back to our camp, leaving the screams of the cult behind me. I ran for a good 10 minutes until I stumbled upon Anna, who had her head in her lap crying. I cautiously went to see if she was alright, but before I got near, her head jolted up and her eyes were black holes with blood running from them, and her mouth was gushing that weird substance. She smiled and said in that demonic tone, "You can't run away from us, Tim. The ritual must be complete." I saw Creel behind her as he stabbed his arm through her chest and ripped her heart out. He looked up with a smirk and said, "You know you can't run, Timothy." I panicked and took off running once more, and I heard the ripping of flesh behind me, and the maniacal laughter commenced. I finally made it to the camp, and the campfire started soaring into the sky, and out came Creel. He was just a shadowy figure with long white claws and wore a hood, and his eyes and the inside of his mouth were glowing a blood red. He was taking on the form of the thing in my dream. He morphs into what you fear most at that time. I started running towards the direction of the mountain and noticed a cave. I ran into it and thought to myself, this is where my dream ended. I heard something crawling from inside the cave and heard clicking noises. I immediately darted out the cave knowing he had found me. I fell down the hill, and when I was finished tumbling, I hit my head on a rock and I lost consciousness. I woke the next morning and immediately started running back to the campsite to see that the tent and all of our supplies had vanished. I started to walk towards the graveyard. Either this had all been a dream, or it was a trap. If it was real, I was going to be killed anyway. And if it was merely a dream, I'd have nothing to worry about. I arrived at the site and saw that it was merely a small plain. No bodies, no blood, no dagger, and no sign of human interference. Still, where was Cadence, Anna, and Ivan? Where did the supplies go? I went back into town and tried to find some answers, but everyone kept their distance from me and refused to speak to me, even the police. I desperately tried to call Cadence's cell phone, but it kept going to voicemail of her saying something in a foreign language. The only thing I can make out of it is my name at the end, Tim. After a month of searching, I couldn't find her. I eventually ran out of money and had to go back to the US. I had suspected that her and Ivan ran off together or something. It destroyed me. But after 5 long years, I'd gotten over it, and eventually got remarried to you, Sophia, and had Ethan. I'd forgotten the whole ritual thing until about 2 months ago, when I started to get a letter from a woman named Cadence and a man named Ivan. I didn't want to scare you, so I didn't say anything. The letters say, "You thought you could get away, Tim? But the ritual is not complete." Written in dozens of what appears to be dead languages. I get phone calls that consist of someone screaming my name. It was all true. Every fucking bit. But why did it allow me to live? Why so long? I can't allow this creature to be released upon our realm. I don't even know if this will stop it, but it's the only solution that I know could possibly work. So I'm writing this to you, Sophia, in the hopes that you will understand that there was no other way. I love you and Ethan more than anything, and I'm sorry. I had awoken to find that Tim wasn't in bed. How strange of him. Oh well, probably just making breakfast or something. Happy at the thought of breakfast in bed, until I heard Ethan screaming. I darted to go in and check on him and he was crying again. Probably had another bad dream. He'd been having a lot of those in the past 2 months. Was it another bad dream, honey? I asked, already knowing the answer. He was sobbing too much, so I went downstairs to go find Tim. He always knew how to cheer Ethan up. I reached the kitchen and noticed we had some mail, and I saw the word urgent written sloppily on the envelope. I opened it and it said, "We let him live because the initial host was not pure. We needed a pure host of the same bloodline as a witness to the ritual." I was scared and confused. I put the letter back down on the onyx countertop, and then I heard a loud, sharp bam. A gunshot went off upstairs. I started panicking, and as I started rushing towards the sound, I heard maniacal demonic laughter coming from Ethan's room. All of the lights in the house were suddenly shut off. I was even more confused, and I started wandering around in the darkness. I suddenly felt hot breath hit the back of my neck.